So we're talking policy here at the legislative level. Our good Governor Sanford made an effort. He signed a law that says you give the family members 30 days first preference. 30 days to buy the new partner out. Well, that's pretty stiff challenge to come up with millions in 30 days, because that's what the value of the land is. And so that's one way that land has been lost. The other way is people just outright sell it because some members are now living in the cities, in the urban centers, and the urban centers are now coming closer to us in the rural South Carolina. Urban centers mean there's a new town that just got built, and folks are moving in there away from the land. And so when you leave the land is no longer important. And so that wealth is lost. Some families are now, Bernie, you may be interested to know that a few families are now incorporating themselves. And at least one that I know doing pretty well by leasing to the new crop. That doesn't do anything about, us developing an economy of farming and producing things that we need right here to eat. But it does preserve that wealth, the family wealth. And so there are a number of ways that we could preserve the land. The other one is talking to our tax assessors and our county government and seeing whether or not land that are being used or even our remaining rural should be taxed differently or evaluated differently until such time that it gets changed to a different use. But that's the challenge, and those are some of the solutions that we can employ. The last question had to do with.
But how do we keep the ideas that are helping us to move our community forward, keep them from being co-opted and really taken away from us so that we can't control them?
Education. We've got to empower our families and our rural families with education on how to keep the land, how to employ those particular methods. We actually in danger now of some developers taking over the open air markets in our area, because it's such an attraction for people to come to buy land and build houses in an area where you have fresh local produce. And if nobody else is doing it, they're going to do it. And before you know it, you're back on the farm for somebody else.
I wondered if one of you would comment, Mr. Campbell, you mentioned the early efforts to form cooperatives. And I understand in other southern states, perhaps like in Mississippi, there was a very successful and still existing and viable network of black farmers who negotiated with Walmart. And that didn't happen in South Carolina. And is there something you can pinpoint as to why that didn't really flourish here? Either one of you talked about it.
I do know that it had to do with people understanding how co-ops work before we organize. People not understanding how co-op works before we organize. And in the case of the shrimp co-op on Hilton Head Island, the tomato co-op on St. Helena Island, they're both co-ops that got established in the 1960s. When the markets were competitive, highly competitive markets in tomatoes and shrimp. And so the members of those cooperatives became impatient with what they were being paid for their goods. And so they would actually, what we would call, bootleg their goods. And so you didn't have the volume when the volume was needed to go to market, because people were bootlegging and didn't understand how important it was to hang together. And I think that's why those co-ops failed and the others are doing better, because it took time to educate the members. In the 1930s, when a co-op was organized on St. Helena Island, it worked well for some 20 years. It was a co-op that supplied the equipment and and fertilizer primarily, and seeds. And those folks hung together for some 20 years before that co-op went out of business.
I was wondering, to try this new endeavor of building a rural economy and looking at prosperous rural communities. I think to do that, we recognize we have to cross some divides of race, divides of economic disparities, sort of the urban-rural divide. I wonder if either of you would have some examples of places where that's been done successfully, and some examples to emulate, or places you think that it succeeded. Trying to cross those divides in a successful way to reach a common goal. Some examples of that, or lessons of that?
The state of Mississippi has something called the William Winter Institute, which deals directly with racial reconciliation and racial issues, but it has an economic component to it, and it provides a forum for bringing people together and for letting ideas develop, and from ideas then can come programs. In South Carolina, I think, doesn't really have anything like that. The other thing to recognize, and it goes back to the history of the state, in the past is what shapes us, is that in the decade of 1990s, from 1990 to 2000, I've got it over there written down, but I think I know the numbers pretty closely at least. The black per capita income in South Carolina compared with whites rose from something like 49% to 51 and a fraction percent, a rate at which in another century they would be equal. And you currently have, a legislature that is talking about reducing the school year by 2 weeks for public education. That means over 12 years, 2 weeks times 12 is 24 weeks, 6 months. And we'd be competing against the rest of the nation and the rest of the southern states as well. And this sort of seeming difficulty in recognizing that if you're going to attract industry, and they want workers for the future, that we spend something like $2,000 per student per year that the state contributes toward higher